model car fans. Welcome to the Muscle Car Modeler. My name is Raul, and here is the completion of my 73 Trans Am build here. And just a little more info on the Trans Am for 73. This is one of my favorite cars, and the last of this body style with the Endura front bumper like this. I really like the cleanliness of this design, and the first year for the Big Bird. So a few interesting things about the Trans Am for 73. It still had the 455 Pontiac engine in it, and which in the Trans Am, that's all you can get, was a couple of different versions of the 455. What's interesting is for the 70 model year, there were 400s, and then 71 was the first year they stepped up to the 455. But due to looming emissions and some of the other things, that there were cuts coming away, and even the Camaro, you couldn't get the 454 in the Camaro in 73. So your high performance options were really limited in 1973, but this is one of the exceptions. 73 was when Pontiac introduced this motor, which is the one I was replicating the Super Duty 455. Very rare car, but pretty amazing for what it was doing at the time. Rated at 310 horsepower and something like 390 foot-pounds of torque. It had special cylinder heads, a special cam. It was a lot like the Rammer 4 cam, but just a little bit milder. But this was during the emissions time, and it also was doing it with 91 octane fuel and unleaded, and with only 8.4 compression, which is pretty staggering to think that they were able to do that and come out with a motor package that can do that. They were all hand assembled, and they also very few were made because of it. I guess there were some supply engines, but the 252 were made, and of those only like 74 or 75 of them were 4-speeds, which is what this one pretty much replicates. I did a Super Duty 455, and the model had a 4-speed, so I converted the interior to a 4-speed. So if you're watching my videos, MPC gives you an automatic transmission as far as the interior goes, but it has a manual 4-speed, which that happens a lot with the MPC kits in this time frame. It seems like all the interiors are automatics. It's kind of interesting, and I laugh at that, but this one, I converted it to a 4-speed, so there's a shifter in there, and the console was changed and modified. But to go along with that, there were 46,000 Trans Ams made for 73, and like I said, only 252 of them were the Super Duty 455s. But not Trans Ams, 46,000 Firebirds total, not just Trans Ams. But that's all Firebirds. But the Super Duty engine was also available in the Formula as well. Which made for an interesting car, but only I think 43 of those were made. So you got the Formula body. I think the wing was an option on those, but they all had the shaker hood. So if there was a Formula 455 Super Duty, it had the shaker hood instead of the Formula hood, but it had the regular Formula body. Didn't have the scoops and the ground effects and the spoilers and stuff on the rest of the body. But then that one's pretty much a real sleeper. And when it had the shaker hood, no bird on it, but or screaming chicken as some people call it. But this is just one of my favorite. This pretty much is my favorite car of 1973, which is the year I was born. So that's one of the things I like, that draw me to it. Is the few cars are available in 73. This is my favorite. Like the Corvette, that one's kind of different also. They had some odd things, but I really like the way they did this. And Pontiac, they did a pretty good job, because in 74 they had to change the bumpers for the crash test. So I like these body bumpers and the rear bumper and all this, the small trim that goes along with it. I really think they look really good, and the Camaro looks really good. But in 74 Pontiac had to modify it, and I really like how they did the 74 Firebirds versus the 74 Camaros. So they really dressed it up. But this one is, as you know, if you've been following this build, which a lot of people have, so there was a lot of excitement. I started with an MCW Resin trans kit that he offered the body, because MPC really didn't offer a Trans Am for 73. They had the Formula 400s. They were doing those, and I've got some of those. They did do the Trans Am for 70 and 71, so the parts were pretty much out there. But if you wanted to build one, you had to scavenge up some parts. You had to get the body pretty much is exactly the same as far as a Trans Am body from 70 to 73. The grill is a little bit different, so if you wanted the actual kit 73 grill, you had to get the 73 grill. And then the only other thing on the body, as far as the model kit goes, is the dated rear license plate of 1973, which for me, I had to have that. I really like those. And then the interior tub is 71 to 73 specific, and the seats are a little bit different, but I think they're the same, 72 and 73, but I think 70 I believe is low backs, and 71, so these seats may be 71 to 73. But you know, not a whole lot of changes, but you do have to collect a few parts. But this one I did as a custom here a little bit, more of a not a pro touring car, but it's a resto mod, and I talked a bit about that in one of my last videos on this. For resto mod is taking a 2/3 restored car, but adding a few modern conveniences to it for performance and maybe a little bit of reliability. Oh, and speaking of reliability, not only did these cars have to pass emissions to be federally legal, they also had to last 50,000 miles, which the earlier cars didn't have to do. So in the test, they had to survive 50,000 miles on the engine. So that's good for the consumer, but it was a little harder on the manufacturers to make them do that. So, you know, like the ZL1 Camaro, that one wasn't meant to, it's a race motor, that particular engine, and some of the high performance engines, and they cut the warranties down on engines, but 73 they were required to survive 50,000 mile durability tests. But onto my build here, as I daydreamed about doing it as a because this is how I would actually have built the car if I owned one. The green really stands out to me in that year. This isn't exactly a stock green. I used Tester's British Racing Green Metallic. But Brewster Green is what they came in. And I'm not too fond of that particular color. It's a nice color, but you know, I'd rather have the metallic. And this one has the gold metallic in the paint here. And then the decals are from Keith Marks. So the bird, or the decals are all his, and there's a little bit of gold in that, which goes along with my build. And as I mentioned previously, he did the Super Duty 455 in gold on the side of the shaker for me. His decal sheet offered it in blue, black, and then on the green sheet. And he did offer them in the different colors, red and blue on his other color sheets, but for some reason on the green sheet they were in black. So I asked if he can do them in gold, and he did that for me. And then I added these mirrors. They don't come in the kit. None of the MPC come with mirrors for some reason. They just didn't back then. And those are from Scale Equipment Limited. So I got those. So the mirrors are resin. The body's MCW Resin. And then the decals are Keith Marks. And then the wheels. These are 19-inch wheels from Hobby Design. I added those for the Pro Touring look. And then I added the big brakes in there so if you can see the brakes. Those are actually from the AMT, one of the 2016-2017 Camaro kits that I had for parts. I had bought one specifically to rob the transmission out of it for another build. And I noticed the brakes, so I swapped the brakes. So the rest of the car is pretty much stock as far as the kit components go, with some tweaks of fitting and shaving and making some things work. But here's a whole underside with the 455 engine, the manual tranny, and then the rear end, and then fitting the wheels and getting them just glued in place. And then the exhaust, which this is a little bit later exhaust. In 73 they should go straight, not curl down. It's more like the 77. Not really sure when they started doing that. And then the wing, and then all the tweaking of the resin parts, getting the glass to fit. But I went over a lot of those build things that were going on. And there's the engine with the shaker. And you saw when I used the epoxy putty to get the shaker to fit. So there's the epoxy putty. So I can space it up and get it to fit But I'm real happy with the way she sits in there now and fits. And then the Super Duty engine decal that's right there. Keith Marks provided that. But real pleased with how this one came out and how this one's done. And I daydream about if I own the car, it would be the Pontiac engine, but probably a stroker kit. They're somewhere around from, they do have different stroker kits for the Pontiac engines. With the 455 block, I guess you can go from 488 to a 505. I was just kind of daydreaming about that. And probably a 5 or 6 speed manual transmission. And then the more modern suspension, keeping the traditional suspension as far as the unequal A-arms and the leaf springs, but front and rear sway bar is a little bit bigger than stock. Urethane bushings, faster ratio steering box, and some of that stuff. And tubular, probably tubular upper and lower control arms, but not really going all out rack and pinion and full on race and tall spindles, that kind of stuff. But like the Willwood or Bear brakes, and then that's how I would have it. And then like my real car, my Chevelle, I have a fuel injection on it, so it looks like a carbureted engine, but it runs like a fuel injection, and it runs really good. So I like that, and my station wagon will probably have something like that similar. But I figured I would share this off and show it off to everybody, and that's been following along and commenting and really loving the way this thing builds. Oh, one more little tip for you guys. I tucked the wheels in, but getting it to sit flat so it doesn't wobble. A little trick to that. I mounted the 2 wheels first. I mounted one front wheel as low as I could to get the look I wanted. So if you notice, that front wheel is a little lower and tucked in, and the rear's about the same. But she sits flat. And I've noticed, when a model wobbles, it stands out. So to get it to not wobble, you see that tire is just a little bit lower in the front. There's a little bit more of a gap here in the fender. I have not had anybody ever notice a gap here, but if your model doesn't sit flat and it wobbles on the table, I've had people notice that, judges, anybody. Even sometimes when I'm moving them around, you see kind of wobble a little bit. This table isn't exactly flat either, but I have a piece of glass that I use when I'm doing something like that. But my options were to move this one up a little bit and space this rear one down a little bit more, but I liked the way the rear ones were squatting, so I decided to leave it. But almost nobody would notice the tiny little 16th or 1/8 of an inch difference right there. You can see it when I do this, turn it sideways, and then turn it that way. You can see the tires tucked in a little bit more. But I don't know anybody's ever noticed that when they're judging a model. They'll notice that it's sitting flat or it's not sitting flat. I had some issues with this one. In the very beginning, the body was warped and twisted. I got it glued square and everything. It actually appears square. It doesn't look twisted. But part of the issues I have is this particular MPC, what it's based off of, you glue the interior to the body. I had a whole bunch of issues getting the interior tub to fit. I got it in there fitting really well. And then the chassis glues right to the bottom of the interior, and it glues to the back where the bumper mounts are, but it doesn't really glue in the front. The front kind of floats. So even now I can kind of push it and twist it, but there really isn't anything that holds the front. And I can push the front fender down a little bit to change the gap a little bit, but when I let it go, it lifts. So that's just part of the way the model's built, and I really can't do anything about that. Or I could try to figure something out, but if I put any bracing in there, you'd probably see it under the hood. And it's really hard to work on doing that without, you pretty much have to do it while you're gluing it and hold it down. But so I left it alone. But there she is, all finished up and looking great. I'm loving these wheels, and if I want to turn it right into stock, all I gotta do is pop these wheels off and put the stock wheels on, which it came with. MCW sent 2 sets, the honeycombs and the super stock wheels, they call them. But I think that's what they call them. Most people call them the rally wheels, but Pontiac called them like super stock. But there she is. She's all done. Hope you guys enjoyed it and followed along. And for those that have been following along, thank you for subscribing and sharing and tuning in. And thank you for your comments. I love reading the comments and replying to them. So that's probably enough babbling on for me. And you guys, you have a wonderful day, and thank you.